It's over. It's finally over. Smallville is done. And you know, I'm amazed at just how long they kept up this pattern of Clark evolving his character and then backpedaling again. And this holds true even for the finale. I mean, I've lost count of how many times he's talked about how he knows his destiny, he's confident in what he's doing, and then in the very next episode or the very next scene, he's like, I'm a stupid bitch. I don't know anything. I know, dealing with doubt and struggling with your identity is a very common human trait, but for the purpose of this show, it just feels really old and overdone here. I actually found it much more convincing, and entertaining, during the scene where Martha shows up and Clark says, Hi Mom, I just sold the farm like you wanted, and she's like, You fucking idiot, I never wanted you to sell the farm, and he just shrugs and says, Well, you gave me the deed anyway, bitch, and that's what I done did. Surprisingly though, I don't have too much criticism for the finale, just a few minor little things to point out, just a few tiny details here and there, yeah now. First of all, after all this build up to Darkseid being Clark's most powerful enemy ever, how is Clark ever going to beat him? Oh, apparently he just has to punch a zombie and he disappears in a puff of smoke. It's over in like 2 seconds. Well, that was no big deal. Second of all, there's the costume. Yes, he finally puts on the suit, but we never get a clear shot of him wearing it. You only see parts of it in close-ups, or it's a CG model from 5 miles away hidden behind bloom lighting and lens flare. You motherfucking titty-sucking two-balled bitch, what the fuck was that? You know, I kinda get the impression that they tested Tom wearing the costume and went, yeah, this isn't gonna work. Let's just do it with special effects. I'm sorry, but after 10 years, after all the build-up to this freaking costume, just show him in the goddamn suit already. I mean, surprisingly, the computer animation actually wasn't bad, but I just want one proper shot of the actor wearing the damn thing. I don't think that's asking for too much. Oh, and for all you people who bitched at me for my Season 9 rant, all of you who called me a dumbass and said, Oh, but he'll put on the final costume in the finale. We'll get to see the costume in the finale, just you wait and see. You can all officially suck my asshole because this is all we got. This was the last hurrah for the show and it ended with a fucking teaser. Gee, if I was actually a fan of the show, I think I'd be pissed off. But you know, that really wasn't even my biggest problem with this. No, the one thing that really bothered me is that there were a couple of scenes at the beginning and end that showed a flash forward to 7 years later, and we see Chloe reading a comic book to her son, and it's the story of Superman. Now, okay, in this universe where Superman is real and he's Earth's greatest hero, I can imagine them making comic books about him, but the thing is, the comic book is called Smallville, and it tells his actual full origin story. That's the most ridiculous, and meanwhile Clark is still working at the Daily Planet and no one's the wiser, even though there's apparently a comic book floating around out there that tells everyone who he is. Why would something like that exist in that universe? How stupid do they think we are? But by far, the funniest part about this whole thing is that after Chloe finishes reading the story to her son gets really excited and he starts thinking about wanting to be a superhero. And he looks off to the side and there's a bow and arrow set just leaning against the wall in his room. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's Green Arrow's son, so it makes sense, right? But this kid is like 5 years old, probably even younger, and he's looking at this bow and arrow like, oh, I'm gonna start some shit with this. And Chloe knows. You can tell that she knows. But she just smiles and walks out and closes the door. Good night, son. I'm just gonna lock you in here unsupervised with some weapons. Pay no attention to those. Yeah, I'm just imagining this isn't going to end well. And on a final note, I couldn't let this go without mentioning the return of Lex Luthor. Now, one of the main arguments that fans of the show like to throw at me is that this is a reimagining of the Superman mythos, and so they assume that I just can't handle any changes to the story. Well, I'm sorry, but that's just not true, and that's why I bring up the example of Lex Luthor. I actually feel like the show's reimagining of Lex started off in a really interesting direction, but where it ultimately ended up wasn't. This show has actually given us the most thoroughly developed version of Lex Luthor ever put to film, but seeing as how he died some time ago, this version of Lex in the finale is actually a Frankenstein clone monster who has all of the original Lex's memories. So he knows who Clark is, he still feels betrayed because Clark kept his secret for so long, but he's ultimately willing to let that go because he understands that Clark is necessary for the greater good. That's what makes this so unique. He knows his place in the story. He knows he's the villain, and he wants to take over over the world, but he also knows that the hero is needed to keep the world from being destroyed by an even greater threat. This would have been so much more interesting if they had actually stuck to it. Can you imagine how much more awesome the dynamic would have been if Lex Luthor actually knew Superman's secret, but just silently agreed not to tell anyone, and Superman had to deal with that hanging over his head? But no, what did they do with him instead? They just used some MacGuffin device to derp his memory away. Never mind all the other people that Clark knew, say at the Daily Planet. They didn't get their memories erased, but the one interesting new idea that we had, yeah, we're just gonna get rid of that for no reason, to make it more like the original, thus negating the one advantage we have of this being an alternate story. But that's Smallville. What else can I say except it's over, it's fucking over.